Hello, welcome to a special edition of Inside the Birds. It is part 2 of our Super Bowl recap from an analytics standpoint, and we bring back our analytics reporter, Sam Finkel, to really break down this game from a data standpoint. Did such an amazing job in part 1, Sam. We went through a lot of the aggregate stats, the advanced passing stats, and then you had some really interesting data on what the pass catchers did, what the pass defense did. And in this episode, what we're going to talk about is the trenches, because we all know that is where games are won and lost. We'll get into some pass rush win and loss rates, get some pass block win rates, and then you have even more notes that we can go through at the end as we start to turn the page here. Are you ready to turn the page on what was a special season and then start to get into the offseason nitty-gritty of contracts and market evaluation?
Get me on Broad Street first. Let's get this parade, and then we'll talk.
I like that. That's good stuff. All right. So let's get right into it, and we'll talk right away on the trenches. And we had a really interesting conversation in our analytics preview series of the Super Bowl about this Chiefs offensive line, the left side of it, with starting Mike Caliendo, Joe Thuney having to play left tackle when he's really a left guard. And then we sort of had a discussion on what's going to happen with the Eagles front four. Will they be able to win some one-on-ones on the inside against really good players like center Creed Humphrey and right guard Trey Smith? So why don't you give me an overall jump out number or data or something that really you think tells the story of this battle of the trenches?
Yeah, so I think the first number I want to give you is Creed Humphrey's number. 0% pressure allowed on dropbacks. They did not really get success against him.
Wow.
Which I just think is an incredible statistic that they still were this successful, and yet they didn't do it through the center.
Yeah, he's like the meme of John Travolta walking into the from Reservoir Dogs and walking into the empty room and looking around like, was anybody else going to play today, or is it just me?
Oh, that's a perfect call for sure.
But we knew, right, Sam? We knew because I don't have it in front of me. Maybe you do. But going into the preview, what was his success rate anyway? He's he might be the best center in the game.
Yeah, I think so. It was only 2% pressure allowed. So.
Yeah. And what remind the listeners again, what's considered like sort of a baseline good percentage for an interior offensive lineman?
Yeah, it's hard. You typically like maybe 8%.
Okay,
is typical.
Gotcha.
For interior,
so asking for interior, a friend, 0% is pretty good then.
I would say 0% is pretty good.
Yeah, no
interior rates are typically going to be lower percent allowed just because you have more help.
Right,
as opposed to the tackles where you're kind of on an island.
Right. However, when you're going up against the Eagles, you could probably inflate the number a little bit because you have to face JalenCarter and Milton Williams. So even if you get help, you're facing two of the better guys in the entire league.
Yeah, and what's interesting is all the pressure basically came from Thuney.
Yeah. I kind of feel bad for the guy. I mean, he's not a left tackle. It's not his fault. The tape showed, Sam, and we'll get into the data. What the tape showed is being a shorter-armed offensive lineman, which most guards are. That's why they're guards. Really hurt him against Sweat, who's long and lengthy, and Jalix Hunt, who's long and lengthy. Because there are times he just couldn't get his hands into their chest before they were getting their arms into his and driving him backwards.
Yeah, and that resulted in 16.67% of pressure allowed on dropbacks.
Wow. Against Thuney, right?
Against Thuney, yep.
That is an astronomical number. Do you have what it was throughout the playoffs or for Thuney? I know it was high to begin with because he was moving, but that seems awfully high.
The entire season, including playoffs, was 8.2%.
Oh, my God. We're talking about more than double the pressure rate.
Yeah, it was not a good game for him.
And when you look across the board at Trey Smith, Jawan Taylor, we already mentioned Humphrey, even Caliendo, they don't have awful numbers. Taylor had 4. What's a good edge, like an offensive tackle pressure rate allowed?
Probably like 10%.
Yeah, and you have Jawan Taylor at 4.76. So it really showed you how much the left side was able to dominate this game. What did you, from a defensive standpoint, from an Eagles standpoint, which jumped out to you there?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I didn't even necessarily have him on the thing, but JalenCarter Hunt with 23.5% win rate is crazy. And Moro Ojomo had 26.3% win rate with less snaps, but still it's worth noting for sure.
Yeah, and that's significant, Sam, because as we will look toward the next year in the future, it's going to be hard for the Eagles to keep Milton Williams, who, what was his win rate in the Super Bowl?
19%. Third
Say that again?
19.
19% win rate in the Super Bowl. That is unbelievable. And then obviously Josh Sweat is another guy who has an expiring contract and will be in free agency. So if you're going to be missing an edge rusher and missing an interior defensive lineman, your note here about what JalenCarter Hunt and Moro Ojomo contributed what again?
So he had 3 hurries with a 26.3% win rate.
I mean, that's pretty phenomenal right there.
Especially for the limited snaps he took. Like it's pretty impressive.
Yeah. Now, JalenCarter, we talked about this was a big matchup. He had to face Trey Smith and Creed Humphrey. What did the numbers show?
Yeah, so he had 1 QB hit, 1 hurry, and a 6.5% win rate.
Right. So the data really shows here that what your eyes saw, which was a lot of Milton Williams and some Josh Sweat and Nolan Smith and JalenCarter Hunt, really were the big data-driven guys.
Sometimes your eyes don't lie. This is one of those cases.
Now, is a hurry, when you get a sack, do you get a hurry with it?
No. So it'll always filter to like the most successful outcome.
So then Josh Sweat had 3 sacks and 4 hurries. Would you call that 7 total pressures?
7 total pressures, yes.
Very interesting. And that really jumps off the bit. I mean, Nolan Smith had 4 total. And man, to have for Ojomo to have 3 on the few snaps that he played, right? And then 5 hurries from Hunt on the limited snaps that he plays is amazing.
Yeah, it's really incredible. The defensive line, I feel like doesn't necessarily get as much credit as the offensive line, but this was a statement game for them.
Absolutely. Mike Caliendo had a 4.76 pressure rate, according to your stats here. Not as terrible as maybe we thought going in. But again, it seemed like that's because they just attacked Tooney at the edges.
Yeah, that's basically what happened. If it weren't for Tooney, I do think most of the pressure would have came from there because they really were pressuring that left side.
Yeah, absolutely. So, boy, sometimes you think like everybody's getting dominated, but then when you go inside the numbers like this, you see how there are occasions where one player or 1 or 2 players can really wreck a game. It kind of reminds me, I don't know if you remember the 2006 Monday night or Sunday night game. The Eagles played against the Giants and Trey Thomas was out and Winston Justice had to fill in at left tackle. And Osi Umenyiora just kept, beating him and forcing McNabb to run or get sacked or, throw bad passes. And, was every single pressure over Winston Justice? No, but it felt like 80% of them were. And literally that one matchup just wrecked that game for the Eagles. Do you remember that? Were you old enough to remember that?
I was 8.
All right. Maybe your parents talked about it one day.
For sure.
Well, it's infamously known in Philadelphia as the Winston Justice game. And too bad. Winston Justice was a really good guy, but it was his first start and not a great game for him. 2nd round pick out of USC. Let's get into the other side, the Eagles offensive line against the Chiefs defensive line. What are some of the data that just jumped out from this?
Yeah, I think it's also Juergens and Becton's pressure rate, which is the same. It's 3.33%.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, before something I should have mentioned previously, you're going to see in these numbers, the sack numbers aren't necessarily going to line up. And that's because sometimes sacks are given to like the tight ends or the running backs that are in pass protection. So that's why that happens. That's why. Just
gotcha.
But yes, the things that jump out to me are Juergens and Becton, both allowing 3.33%, and everybody else only 6.67%.
Yeah, like there were times the Chiefs got pressure. I think JalenHurts' scrambling ability helped mitigate that. We talked about that. How about Lane Johnson giving up a sack? Something you don't really see too much.
Yeah, it was uncharacteristic of him. He allowed 0 sacks on the year previously. So, but it happens, and they made it work.
Yep. Who on the Chiefs defense did the best?
Yeah, it's Chris Jones.
Not
which
surprisingly.
not very surprising. And we knew that going in. He had an 18.8% on the season, including playoffs, and 19% in the Super Bowl. So pretty standard stuff from him. And that's exceptional, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, there was one guy who jumped out to me on the tape, Sam, who I didn't know much about. I think he wears number 96 on the Chiefs defensive line. Do you know who I'm referring to?
I should.
His name is, it might have been, I had to go to the depth chart and be like, who is this guy? Wharton.
Oh, yeah, Trishawn Wharton. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
He also had an exceptionally high win rate at 16.7%, which is 6% higher than his season.
Yeah.
And he actually did have a pretty good game from when watching the film.
Yeah, I think Dickerson really gutted one out. It was not Dickerson's best game. He didn't allow a bunch of sacks, but there were times he allowed some penetrations. You could see him limping out there. He was kind of giving it his all. I just felt in general that Chiefs front really, and this underscores your point about the Chiefs defense did not play nearly as bad as the outcome looked. Eagles offensive line were at times, especially in the run game, just did not have its standard amount of success.
Well, I do think it's also the injuries, right? So they
Totally.
Juergens and Dickerson both came in injured. Becton got hurt in the game for a little bit. So I do think that contributed to it. And Dickerson did have that one play that was one of the most athletic plays I've ever seen him out. You know the one I'm talking about, where like pirouettes over.
Is that, where he had to turn and pick up the guy coming through the A gap?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Which honestly was a masterclass in my opinion, and I think one of the best plays I've ever seen.
Yeah.
But that being said, I think the injuries were a big part of it. And that Chiefs defensive line is nothing to scoff at.
Yeah. I think a lot of people forget that the Chiefs, and listen, I get it. They did not look good. They almost look like an aging team, like with Kelsey kind of and Hopkins dropping passes. This guy, it almost looked like their time was up, but they get Rashee Rice back next year, and they certainly unlocked Xavier Worthy. And defensively, they're always going to load up. They do need some cornerback help. I think, obviously they had to move on from L'Jarius Sneed because they can't afford everybody. The Eagles will find out what that's like in a year or two. But for the most part, I think the Chiefs will be all right, especially defensively.
Yeah, I think so too. Especially with Spags coaching. I'll always be worried about them when that's the case. And what was interesting is, and I think, I don't remember if we talked about this, but the condensed formations, right? So every time the Eagles land up in a condensed formation, I was nervous because that's how the Chiefs destroyed the Bills. That's where they bring their exotic looks. And there were a couple snaps where the Eagles did that, and I was always extremely nervous when that happened. But it's still, they had a good plan for it.
Absolutely.
I think that's worth mentioning.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, let's talk about some of the notes that you've collected on the Eagles offense and defense, aside from the trenches, but some of it's on blitzing, some of it's just in general. What did you observe from an Eagles offensive standpoint against the Chiefs blitz?
Yeah, so the Chiefs blitzed 12 times, generated 3 pressures, 25% pressure rate, which was their third lowest of the season.
So they blitzed their 25%. That's probably their normal pressure rate, right? And because Spags is known as a guy who it looks like he's blitzing all the time, but he drops a lot. So it's not always a high blitz rate.
So the blitz rate is probably typical. The amount of pressures that they got off of those blitzes is what was the third lowest.
Right. Amazing. 3 pressures off 12 blitzes. Good job by the Eagles picking that up and JalenHurts knowing when to get rid of it. But Jalen's always been good against the blitz. It's against the zone blitz that he struggled, but I feel like most of the blitzes Spags through, especially that early one that got the Jahan Dotson, got him on the double move. That was a man blitz, and they picked it up right away.
And the interception that Hurts thrown should have been a touchdown. If he had a little bit more time, he had that. And I think that's also worth mentioning because that was another blitz look that probably could have and should have been a touchdown if he had maybe a second more.
Is that the one where I don't think Cam must have thought somebody else was picking it up because they basically let Bolton come right down the middle?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, he lined up over the 8. It wasn't even like a disguised blitz. He just, as soon as the ball was snapped, it almost like you could see Bolton's head, like, no one's really going to block me. I'm just going to run right down the middle.
And that was one of the only really catastrophic play that the Eagles had, and it should have been a touchdown. and I think it would have been.
How about some of the big play opportunities against the blitz? What stood out?
Yeah, so basically they took advantage and they made 2 big time throws, should have been 3, like I said. Which with the 17.4 ADOT or average depth of target, and 11 yards per attempt.
That's super high.
It definitely is. It's definitely an impressive number, and it should have been higher. I'm gonna just lay my hand on that.
Hey, they'll take it, man. They'll take it. They're Super Bowl champs. All right. What else about the Chiefs defense, specifically with blitzing and pressure?
Yeah, so they affected about a third of the Eagles' passing plays with pressure, which was their 8th lowest pressure rate and 5th lowest allowed by Philadelphia.
Okay, so the Eagles did a good job of combating the Chiefs' pressure. And the Eagles' offense, as far as EPA per play, and explain EPA, please.
Yeah, so EPA per play it's another efficiency metric, right? So what it stands for is expected points added per play. And it's basically used to see how many points would be added essentially per that. I know that's like kind of a redundant definition, but it takes in consideration various factors such as like field position, distance, down, game situation, and many other things. It's just another advanced analytic tool, like the framework that I explained before, except this one's a lot more complicated. It's a more complicated formula. But yeah, it's just trying to figure out what plays led to points. That's at the end of the day, that's what it essentially is trying to measure.
Okay, and what did you find out from the Eagles in the Super Bowl on it?
So they averaged almost 0.5 at 0.499, which is the highest mark the Chiefs allowed with their starters playing. The only one that was worse was the Broncos game at the end of the season where they all took all their starters out.
Wow.
So
okay, so this was the best against the Chiefs all year or throughout the playoffs?
All year.
All year. Wow. Yeah. Okay. And what else from an EPA standpoint?
So the Eagles generated 0.12 EPA per play when blitzed, which was the 4th worst performance for Kansas City this season. Their average was minus 0.08 EPA per play on the season.
Wow. Well, they picked their poison and they died by it,
They definitely did.
How about JalenHurts individually?
Yeah, he finished with an EPA per drop back of 0.51, which is the greatest of all time in the Super Bowl.
Wait, the what? The what? Say it again.
Greatest of all time in the Super Bowl.
Better than like any other quarterback in the history of the Super Bowl.
There is only 2 other quarterbacks that even stand close, and they're tied. And that was from Super Bowl 52. Both quarterbacks.
That's a familiar game.
It's a very familiar game. So they list Brady higher, even though Foles had the same exact EPA per drop back.
And what was that?
Yeah, that was a Super Bowl victory, I think.
No, I mean, what was their
0.47, and Hurts was 0.51.
Wow, that's like almost a full half point more, right?
Yeah, it's super significant if you're into advanced analytics and understanding that this metric. If you like this metric, Hurts was the best of all time. Wow. And I like metrics that say Hurts are the best of all time. So
your Mount Rushmore of Super Bowl quarterback EPAs are Jalen Hurts, Nick Foles, Tom Brady, and whoever's got 4th. That's pretty freaking amazing.
I think so too. And I think Hurts's 52 performance was, or 57 performance is also on there somewhere too, within the top 10 certainly.
You might have to carve his face twice then, and then 3 of the 4 would be Eagles quarterbacks. That's unbelievable. Yes. All right. So your last stat on Hurts from a completion percentage standpoint?
Yeah. So he finished with 77.3% completion, which is 12.6 higher than his expected completion. And expected completion is just like if we took that play, should that and that pass in that situation, should it have been completed? Mm-hmm. And that's a testament to his tight window throwing and big time throws, right? Because they're saying it should have been significantly lower. He was 12.6% higher than what would be expected of an average quarterback in that situation.
Wow. Great stuff right there. All right. We'll finish it out with some of the defensive advanced data stats that you've observed.
Sure. Again, this 0 blitzes stat is here's the thing. They did blitz again. It was a penalty, and there was like 1 or 2 plays that could be sort of considered blitzes. But
yeah, I think if you consider a sim a blitz, I don't, because to me
I don't either.
Yeah,
I think it's just a look. but different sites had different things. Basically, they had 30 pressures in the game. There's also a little bit of a debate whether it's 16 plays or 17 plays. I'm going to go with 17 plays because that's what I saw when I watched it. And they ended up having 6 sacks. Again, coming from no blitz looks, just sim looks, that's incredibly impressive and worth discussing and shouting out one more time.
Awesome. And then zone. It was so heavily zone. All but 2 dropbacks.
Right.
They played zone. That's incredible.
About 60% of them were cover 4. Which was the 3rd highest rate of defense in the NFL since 2018.
I think Vic after the game said, "Gee, I thought I was gonna have to work today. I guess not. I'm just gonna call the same defense all game, and it's gonna work for me. That's great."
Hey, like any great coordinator, he did all his work in those 2 weeks coming up to it.
Yes,
we always had a thing that like it's just execution on game day. We don't want you to think. And the Eagles defense didn't really have to think. That was a big philosophy that we had at Penn State is we want to limit the thought process and thinking. We want it to be muscle memory. And I feel like that's exactly what Vic Fangio did. And honestly, the offense did too.
Yeah. I mean, the give and take to that is you're going to play that much zone. You're going to play that much too high. You're inviting the offense to run the ball. But coaches, Greg Cosell says this all the time, coaches coach against coaches. And Andy Reid will abandon the run. And they're not a great run team this year anyway. 2 years ago, they ran the ball very well against the Eagles in the Super Bowl. But they have not been running the ball very well. The offensive line issues there.
Pacheco being hurt.
So I imagine Vic said, I will invite them to run and dare them to do it and see if they can. And
they were good at it.
Run the ball well.
What's that? In their limited snaps, they were good at it.
Yeah, right. In their limited snaps, they were good, but they just abandoned it. And Mahomes?
Yeah, so they held Mahomes to his 2nd worst performance by EPA in his career at minus 19.3.
Now, is the worst the Super Bowl against Tampa Bay 4 years ago?
I believe it was, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I can't imagine. There's very few times we've seen Mahomes have a bad game. Those are the only 2 that really – although maybe the Bengals, when they lost to the Bengals in the AFC Championship, he had a really bad second half.
He did, but I don't think
it was that bad. Yeah. All right. Awesome.
Last
then go ahead.
Mahomes had a higher pressure rate of 47.1% than completion percentage, 42.9 in the first half.
Wait, say that one more time. He had a higher.
His pressure rate was at 47.1 in the first half, but his completion percentage was 42.9.
Oh my God.
He was allowing more pressure than he was completing passes. And I saw that one in a tweet, and I just that one stuck out to me. And I'm like, that is an incredible stat.
Yeah,
it didn't end up shifting out like that, but in the first half, that's just incredible.
That is unbelievable. Sam, can't thank you enough for taking us inside the data here from Super Bowl LIX. A huge Eagles win. They win 40-22. And in this 2-part series, I think you've taken us inside every single advanced stat that really matters and pertains to the game. So we really appreciate you, and we look forward to doing some more analytics with you, analytics podcasts with you here throughout the offseason as we get into free agency and, of course, the draft.
Sounds good. Thank you for having me.
You got it. All right. For Sam Finkel, I'm Geoff Mosher. That's it for a special edition of Inside the Birds Analytics Style. Have a good one, everybody.